My name is Jessi La Main. I am one of the worship associates here. It's awesome to be here. Speaking of community, little side note, I played a music show at the amazing Booth family farm, I'm forgetting the Greenseed Gardens, and they returned a handful of picks I left there and this amazing rock, which I love rocks, and it has music notes written all over it. I'm sure I didn't leave this at your house, so thank you to the kids for that. Keep that in my pocket with my others. Anyway. So maybe I've mentioned this before, but from the age of about 5 to about 10, I spent at least a month of my summer break with my grandparents, and that's in Central Oregon. When I was about 5, around 1995 for your imaginations, they sold their house that was around the corner from us in Southeast Portland and bought a couple acres in the then booming metropolis of La Pine, Oregon. My grandma, she was a retired longtime factory worker with an absolute heart of gold, the undeniable matriarch of my dad's side of the family. Grandma Dean was incredibly outgoing, and I know I got some of my razzle-dazzle from her, I'm just saying. So not only did she teach me all the best board games, how to make the easiest and best hummingbird food, words, and have a deep love for nature, but most importantly, she taught me that Days of Our Lives was a way better soap opera than Young and the Restless or All My Children. And while I could really go on and on about this amazing woman, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my dear Grandpa Bob. Grandpa, he was a retired military man and longtime Greyhound bus driver with a unique personality type for sure. He would have been and was described as a man of few words. And while that might have been true, he could also speak volumes with those few words or even just an expression or gesture. So for example, when he wanted you to follow him to show you something cool, he'd kind of give you the, and you'd silently scurry off together. Or in a more nuanced way, he'd kind of go like this. When he wanted a hug, or to come over, that meant to go see Grandpa for a hug. Anyway, the most profound thing he would do, in my opinion, is my grandpa would sit on the back porch and tend to the bird houses that he had built for my grandmother. This was a decently large, kind of T-shaped structure with several different bird feeders hung on it so that my grandma could see all the birds right out the back door. First, he would fill all the feeders with their different kind of bird food, whether it was, cracked seed and all those things. And then he would make sure they were all appropriately tightened and fastened. Then he would proceed just to sit on the porch, chain smoke Marlboro Reds, and get to watching. Sometimes I think it was literally to see what was coming through the trees, like the squirrels or the feral cats coming to raid the feeders. But just as often, he was looking for an answer to something deeper. The way the landscape offered him a way to be still in his own kind of way, and in turn come to an answer that made sense to him. An answer to whatever building project he was working on, or an argument with the neighbors, or Grandma. I remember watching Grandpa spending more and more time watching the bird feeders, grappling with the biggest stuff, getting sick himself. He was diagnosed and ultimately died from pancreatic cancer. And I watched him watch those bird feeders more and more as he came to terms with that. As a young child, I really saw Grandpa as sort of an oddball, but kind and fun to be around, even in his silent ways. As an adult looking back, I see Grandpa Bob as a very wise man who knew just what it took to cultivate his version of stillness and understanding. I want to be like Grandpa Bob.
Our reading today is Winter by Greta Crosby, who writes, "Let us not wish away the winter. It is a season to itself, not simply the way to spring. When trees rest, growing no leaves, gathering no light, they let in sky and trace themselves delicately against dawns and sunsets. The clarity and brilliance of the winter sky delight. The loom of fog softens edges, lulls the eyes and ears of the quiet, awakens by risk the unquiet. Winter is a table set with ice and starlight. Winter dark tends to warm light, fire and candle. Winter cold to hugs and huddles. Winter want to gifts and sharing. Winter danger to visions, plans, and common endeavoring, and the zest of narrow escapes. Winter tedium to merrymaking. Let us therefore praise winter. When I was a sophomore in college, I went on a study abroad trip to Great Britain, Scotland, and England. 24 of us, plus our professor and his wife, spent 5 months in Scotland, Glasgow, Edinburgh, and London from September until the end of January. It was in many ways a wonderful trip. I saw things I'd never seen before and never have seen again. I met interesting people, and since the focus of the trip was Scottish literature and British political theater, I saw so many plays. It was awesome. And I was just 18 when I went. It was my first time out of Oregon for more than a week. Our lodgings in London were in a former abortion clinic with institutional green walls and green comforters. My room was so cold that I was successfully able to use the inside of my window as a refrigerator. I slept in long underwear, my sweatsuit, and a coat. By December, we were all pretty scritchy with one another. We had 2 weeks off for Christmas break, and I traveled to Chester for Christmas with some friends from the trip, and then I went alone to the island of Iona for New Year's. Iona is a sacred site off the west coast of Scotland. It's a very small island, about 1 mile long and 1.5 miles wide. It was then home to about 100 people and 1,000 sheep, and a crumbling old 13th century monastery, and was then and now the spiritual home of the Iona community, an ecumenical Christian group working on issues of peace and justice, who have now rebuilt the monastery. I am sure that I would not recognize the place. It is also far enough north that on January 1st, the sun rose about 9:30 and set about 3:30. I awoke on New Year's Day and set off for a ramble around the island. I tromped through sheep fields and down country lanes. The sea comes up to about 10 feet of rocky boulders on the shore, and then there's grass. There is no beach. There was no beach at all. Eventually, I walked around and got to the monastery and looked at the crumbling stone walls, the cemetery with Iona crosses, and the water hitting against the rocks. I sat down on a bench and was just quiet. And I felt this overwhelming sense within me. It was a voice in my head that said, "Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God." A deep sense of peace came over me, and I felt companioned, for lack of a better word, no longer so alone. It was a challenging time in my life. I was lonely and outside of my comfort zone in so many ways. But in the midst of that isolation and struggle, I had a mystical experience that I believe put me somehow on that long and winding road to my calling. It was a very long way from a straight line from there to ministry, some 18 years until I first considered it. But that experience grounded me in the idea that I was not alone in the universe, that something greater than myself was out there, and that was something that I could lean into. Now, I've always promised to define my terms when I talk about concepts like God, because some of us are really uncomfortable with the word, and I know that. So I want to tell you that the way that I understand God is as a creative force in the universe that is found in the natural world and in relationships between and among people. My God doesn't decide who lives, who dies, or who wins the football game. She doesn't do weather. But it is a force that I lean into when I need to know that there is something bigger than I am out there, and that I don't need to do everything alone. When have you listened to that still, small voice within? When have you heard something that took your breath away? Voice still and small, deep inside all, I hear you call, singing. In dark and rain, sorrow and pain, still you remain, singing. It was in that moment of struggle and beauty that I found something important. And it took tromping around an island, alone, in silence, to find it. I am mostly an external processor. I love to talk about things with people. I like negotiating. Where do we want to go to dinner? Or how should we do this thing? Sometimes I need to talk something out before I know how I really feel about it. And yet sometimes I just need to sit in silence. Sometimes I need to kind of nap but not actually sleep and just let all of those thoughts cascading in my brain just run wild for a while without me trying to run them. We need to talk and process and connect. Those are important things. And yet we also need stillness. To listen to that still, small voice that whispers our deepest longings. Maybe we need silence for that giant, godlike or holy mystery voice to wrap us gently in the arms of love and compassion. I don't know about you. I get that mystical sense sometimes when I'm listening to a choir or singing in one. I get it when I'm outside, soaking in the beauty of the world. I get it when I feel like I'm part of something bigger, looking at the constellations. I got it when my children were small and we would look at each other with the deepest, purest love. Sometimes it happens when I'm part of something, playing my own role in something greater. Sometimes it happens here when I'm preaching and together there is magic, the words from my mouth combining with the spirit of the room and you leaning into your partners or nodding along. Sometimes it happens when I'm talking to one or a few of you in my office or your home and something is passing through me that isn't just from me, but is something that I feel compelled to offer because it has landed in my head from something that is beyond me. And sometimes it only happens when I am still and quiet. How does that feeling manifest for you? Does it happen in nature or with people? Does it happen in moments of intimacy or deep human connection? Or does it happen most easily when you're alone? Maybe you don't experience that particular feeling, and that's okay. You don't have to ascribe a religious or spiritual feeling to it. But I hope that you have deep moments of joy and connection however you experience that. Playing Dungeons and Dragons with your chosen family. Caroling with friends. Open house parties. Volunteering at church. Gathering books for the Clackamas bookshelf or food for the Hope Food Pantry. As we enter this season of Advent, of holy waiting, in the Christian tradition for the birth of a baby who would become a savior, in the pagan tradition for the return of the light and the sun, we light candles for Hanukkah, for Kwanzaa, for Advent, all reflecting light returning to the world. But I want to encourage us to not rush to the candles, but instead to sit with the blessings of the holy dark. Trees have evolved very specific ways of surviving the dormancy of winter. According to Purdue University, with the amount of water present in a deciduous tree, it should freeze and crack and die every winter. But instead, its cell structure literally changes. In early winter, when we see the gorgeous colors of the changing leaves, the tree is acclimating to the cold. The beginning of the actual winter phase happens by changing the membranes of the cells to make them more pliable, which allows water to migrate out of the cells and into the spaces in between them. The second way trees avoid freezing is to thicken the fluid within the cells, converting starches to sugars. What happens when a tree makes sugar sap? It's like natural antifreeze, lowering the freezing point of water inside the cells and letting the water outside the cells freeze. But the more pliable membranes mean that doesn't hurt the trees. And then finally, the tree goes through a glass phase where the liquid inside the cell becomes so viscous it appears solid, and solid things don't crystallize. All of these are designed to keep the tree's living cells from freezing. The tree will survive if its living cells don't freeze. Historically, at this time of year, people slept longer hours. They sat around the fire mending clothes or playing music or telling stories. Nowadays, the holidays are often the busiest time of the year. I know there are barely any free nights on my calendar over the next 3 weeks. And that worries me a little. Because if we're just chasing away the dark with more lights, more parties, more festivities, more stuff, then how do we recharge? I am feeling okay about my very busy December this year, however, because after the 29th, I will be on sabbatical for 4 months. I will be resting and recharging with a combination of quiet and activity. I will visit friends and do some traveling. I will be visiting some other congregations and getting examples of how different congregations do worship and religious education. I'm going to go on a pilgrimage to see the Equal Justice Initiative's Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. I will have a few adventures, and I will get to see new places and new sights. And I will spend a lot more time at home, hopefully clearing out some of the boxes we moved in 6 years ago and have never unpacked, trimming my book collection, pruning, not slashing, adopting a new exercise program, and making some art. These are my goals. I want to come back refreshed and renewed with new stories to tell you. I do a lot of caretaking in all sorts of aspects of my life, and I am hoping to care for myself in some different ways over these next 4 months. And I recognize that it is a deep privilege that I have to get to go on sabbatical. I am so grateful for all of the lay leaders here who will keep this place alive and thriving while I am away. And I am grateful to all of you whose generosity of spirit allows me this time away. Even if you don't get to go on sabbatical, there are still ways to restore your spirit in the nourishing dark. Sink into silence for at least a few minutes each day. Sip your favorite hot beverage. I'm an oat milk hot cocoa fan. Listen to the quiet and the longings of your own hearts. Meditate or watch the birds. Even 5 or 10 minutes a day of intentional quiet can restore a weary soul. But like any form of spiritual practice, it has to be intentional. Playing games on your phone is lovely in its own way, but for this activity, you need to just be still. No phones, no reading, just the quiet of your own inner longing. What is the darkness telling you now? If you took the time to be still, what knowings would come to you? Is there something in your life that needs to change? Is there something in your life that you need to embrace, even if it isn't exactly what you want? What is it that you need dark and stillness to truly see? May you find the gifts in the enforced quiet, dear ones. May you listen to the stillness, and may it show you what you need to hear, just as the night sky lets us see the stars. The stars are always there. We just can't see them when it's light outside. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.